All right. Welcome everybody to the Virtual Agent Academy. So let's get started. So today's session is going to be about NLU model tuning. Just a quick introduction. My name is Asif Masood, and I'm a product manager here on the AI team. And the products that I oversee are our predictive intelligence offering, which consists of classification, clustering, and similarity. It also includes natural language understanding, or NLU for short. And today's session is going to be about NLU model tuning. And we're going to start off today's session with the same quote we used in the last session, which is, if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. And now this is especially true with NLU model tuning. Our objective with NLU is to more accurately predict an intent given an utterance. And now you can't understand, or you can't make progress towards tuning your model if you don't understand how it's performing today. And so the analogy that I like to give people is that this is no different than taking a standardized test, whether it's an SAT, your GMAT, or let's say an MCAT. Rarely do people just kind of rush into these exams and take the test on the test day after cramming for months at a time. Usually what they end up doing is they take the test an initial time, they understand where they have gaps in their understanding, and then they set out and they learn to address those gaps. They take the test again, and they further refine their gaps or their understanding of certain areas, and eventually they get to test day and they're confident. They take the test and they leave knowing that they've done the best that they could. While not as rigorous with NLU, the same concept still applies here. Your first objective is to actually understand where you have gaps in your NLU model, so that when you go back to tune, you know that you're making adjustments that are going to have an impact. And so with that, what I'd like to do is state our goals for today. The first thing we're going to do is a quick overview of the steps that are required for model tuning. Then I'm going to jump into an instance and start demoing the product live for you guys. And then finally, once we get through the demo, I'll open it up for Q&A. So let's begin. So when you go out and you start to tune your model, I think there's three important steps that you need to keep in mind. The first is you want to take the time to really analyze the out-of-the-box content, as well as your test utterances. Review, really read every single utterance for the intents that you plan to turn on, so you get an understanding of what they consist of and where they may have potential gaps in understanding. And compare those against your test utterances as well. Really read your test utterances so that you understand what you're testing and what you want the NLU model to do at the end of the day. And now your test utterances are going to come from a number of places. They can come from crowdsourcing mechanisms, such as releasing a Google form or a Microsoft form to a select number of users in your company, and collecting utterances from them given a simple prompt like, how would you express yourself if your laptop was broken? Your test utterances are going to come from a number of places, some from the prompt that I just mentioned, but also internally when you're looking at the NLU model for yourself, you're going to come up with your own set of test utterances that you know are going to be valuable for testing. Once you have those test utterances and you've analyzed those as well as the out-of-the-box utterances, the next thing you want to do is move on to testing your NLU model. You're going to take those test utterances, and within the NLU model builder, you're going to use the test mechanism and go through and test every single utterance that you've collected. Once you have an understanding of how your model is performing given the test utterances, the next step is to move on to tuning. And tuning can consist of a number of things, but by the obvious and the most common ways of tuning your model are going to be adding vocab and utterances. These two things combined will drastically improve your model's performance. And now before we jump into the actual demo, I just want to leave you guys with a quick strategy when it comes to tuning. So it's easy to get distracted by the red herrings or the utterance that seemed so obvious but didn't perform or predict the right intent. My recommendation is to just stay the course. Test every single utterance, document those mispredictions, take some time to understand and investigate why you think the NLU model might have predicted incorrectly, and move on. What you don't want to do is you don't want to attempt to tune right after a missed prediction. What this will do is it might start to undo or impact the test that you performed prior to that tune. So the objective is to understand where you have gaps, make some adjustments, test again, and make additional adjustments as needed. Okay, and so with that, what I want to do is introduce what I'm about to demo. And to do that, I have sample test results for the intent of get password reset link. Now the utterances that I've tested are reset my password, I need help resetting my passcode, I forgot my PW, can you reset my PW, and I can't log in to HR app. And now of those test utterances, the ones that did not pass are the ones highlighted in bold. And during my testing, I made some notes for myself. One is to just say, hey, it looks like the intents that returned for those 3 utterances didn't quite match what I was expecting. So let me remind myself to just go in and review the predicted intents. Let's understand why it predicted those intents as opposed to get password reset link. I've also made some notes to say that, hey, I think what might be happening is that the NLU model didn't understand some of the words that I used here, such as passcode, PW, or in my custom application example, HR app. So those might be things that I need to add to the model to tune it. Okay, so when I jump into an instance, I just wanted to create a mental map for you guys so that you can follow along. The first thing I'm going to do is create an NLU model from scratch. I'm going to retest those utterances that failed, and I'm going to investigate them. And then I'm going to apply a few tuning techniques so that the model will properly or accurately predict the intent when I retest those utterances. Okay, so with that, let's begin. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is create an application. I'm going to call this VA Academy. I'm just going to go ahead and continue in advanced mode. And I'm going to click on my application to enter it. Next, what I want to do is create an application file. And here I'm going to search for NLU. And that's going to return my NLU model. And I'm just going to click on this green create button. At this point, I'm going to give my model a name. Let's call it VA Academy. And I'm going to click save. Now notice I didn't change any of the default parameters such as the confidence threshold, etc. The purpose is that I just want to establish my baseline first. As I start to get more advanced with my tuning, those are certainly parameters that I can adjust to further refine the prediction quality and accuracy of the model. Now what I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to import a set of intents. And the intents that I'm going to bring in are going to be from ITSM. So I'm going to bring in OpenIT ticket. I'm going to bring in RSA token, escalate IT ticket, guest Wi-Fi access, email issues, VPN connectivity. And finally, the one that I'm actually testing is get password reset link. I think an important call out while this is loading is to say that the recommended approach when creating and maintaining a model is to work with one single model that you plan on releasing to your end users. So if you are a hybrid HR, CSM, ITSM customer, go ahead and work with one model. It's going to make training and it's going to make testing and tuning your model that much easier, right? Because it's hard, and currently in Orlando we don't have the ability, or New York we don't have the ability to test across models. That's certainly something that we're working on, but in the short term the recommendation is to work off of a single model. Okay, so now that I have my intents loaded into my model, what I'm going to do is click on the train button, and I'm going to start testing some of those utterances that had failed. Okay, now that it's successful, I'm going to click on the test button, and the first utterance that I want to test is I need help resetting my passcode. Okay, so notice that get password reset link is at 83%. I actually want this to be the one that I return. And instead, guest Wi-Fi access and VPN connectivity is actually showing up much higher than the get password reset link. So the first thing I want to do is I want to open up the VPN connectivity. And I just want to understand why the model is predicting that intent as opposed to get password reset link. So let me just go ahead and click on it. And so some of the common ways of just understanding what's happening here is just to do some quick searches in the model. So if I look for help, I can see that I've got a few hits that say I need help or help. And then if I search for another phrase such as need, then I'll notice that I have additional words in here as well. So this gives me a clue to say that, okay, it might not have understood passcode, but what it is understanding is that these common words appear in this intent and is going to drive the prediction in this direction, which is not incorrect per se, but it's definitely not the behavior that I want it to perform. And so what I want to do now is I want to teach it to say, okay, well, when you hear the word passcode, that's actually your key to understanding that you want to go to the get password reset link intent. So the way we do that is by adding vocabulary. So I'm just going to go back to my main tab here. I'm going to click on the vocabulary tab, and then I'm going to click on add synonym. And this is where I'm going to type in passcode. And our recommendation is to use some regex. And what that allows us to do is say that if someone types in passcode with a capital P or a capital C, it doesn't, the model is going to understand those as all the same. This is something that we're working on. We'll get to it in Quebec. In the short time, we have this option of applying a regex to address the variations in capitalization. So let me just go ahead and type in the regex expression here. And so it's going to be \B $I in parentheses. Then I'm going to type in passcode, and I'm going to end this regex expression with \B as well. And the synonym that I want to give it is password. Go ahead and click save. I'm going to retrain the model. Okay. And now I want to retest this same utterance. And there we go. So now with a simple word that I just added to my model, I'm able to boost the confidence, the prediction score of the utterance, "I need help resetting passcode." It went from 83% to 100%. So let me recap and kind of explain that once more, because I think it's a very important term to understand or strategy here. And that is that by adding a vocab word of passcode and linking it and making a synonym of password, what I've done is I've taken the intent, the utterances within the intent for get password reset link, and have connected a new word to all of the utterances that are in there already. So let me explain that by showing you. So if I click on get password reset link, I have a lot of passwords in here. In fact, I have some that says help resetting password. Now, because I created the synonym between passcode and password, it's now further reinforcing it. And it's almost like I've added 2 utterances in here as opposed to 1. The second utterance would have been help resetting passcode in addition to the one that's visibly here. So it's a nice technique that allows you to maintain the level of your utterances at a manageable state, but allows you to kind of further reinforce what you have in place. So let's go through and test another one. So the next utterance that I wanted to test on my Excel document, and I'll just go back to it so you guys can see, is "I forgot my PW." Again, testing this is showing that you've got RSA token at 90%, but get password reset link at 55%. So again, what I want to do is understand why did it predict RSA token, and then I'll go through and see if there's things that I need to do to my get password reset link to reinforce and encourage the model to predict correctly. So let's go to RSA token. And the utterance that we tested was "I forgot my password," PW. So let's see, do I have a lot of forgots in here? And I've got 2 of them. And is there any my? Yeah, there's a few my's in here as well. And so, you know, this is not an exact science and it's not explaining exactly what's happening behind the scenes, but it gives you a sense for, you know, "I forgot my" is appearing multiple times in RSA token. And so therefore it might be looking at that and saying, actually, you know what, that's the thing that I know I've learned. I'm gonna go ahead and predict that. And it's our job now to say, okay, that's a good start, but let me help you complete the picture here. And the way I'm going to do that is by adding some vocabulary that says, when you see PW, understand that as password as well. So again, I'm just going to go back to my vocabulary tab. I'm going to add a synonym, PW. Again, I'm going to use the regex expression. Okay. And I'm going to add the synonym of password and click save. I'm going to train the model once more. And I'm going to test that utterance that I just tested. So "I forgot my PW." And there you go. With just by adding a single vocab word, I've changed the prediction score of the get password reset link. And I've properly gotten the results that I was looking for. So now when it sees PW, it's going to treat that as password, and it's going to further bolster the confidence of the intent get password reset link. Okay, so let's move on to the final utterance here, which is I can't log in to HR app. So let's go ahead and test this. Over here again, I have the VPN connectivity, guest Wi-Fi access. These are things that are predicting incorrectly, in my opinion. I want that to actually drive to the intent of get password reset link. And so first thing I want to do is just quickly look at the VPN connectivity intent and understand why it might have gone in that direction. Again, the utterance is I can't log in to HR app. So let's quickly look for log. I've got log in here. I can see that already. And that might be the reason why it's pushing the prediction in this direction. So it's looking at that base phrase and it's saying, okay, I've heard, I've understood that before. That might be the reason why I want to predict in that direction. So again, let's take that same tuning technique by adding some vocabulary. In this case, we're going to say HR app. I'm going to use the same regex expression here. Okay. In this case, HR app is an application, so I'm going to go ahead and add it to my synonyms. Okay. So again, I made an adjustment, and now what I want to see is how did that adjustment really impact my model? So I'm going to go ahead and retrain the model again. And once it's done, I'm going to test that same utterance and see if the adjustment that I made had the impact I was looking for. Okay, so I can't log into HR app. Now, I was hoping that with that adjustment, that it would actually drive the right prediction, but unfortunately it didn't work. So what happened, right? At this point, now my model understands HR app, but it understands it as a synonym for application, not as password, right? Because HR app is an application. It's not something that I need to actually, it's not synonymous with password. I use a password to log into HR app, but those aren't quite the same thing. So let's go to the get password reset link and let's start to understand, well, wait, am I referencing application in this intent anywhere? And I'm scrolling and I'm scrolling and I can see password, I see some account, I see email addresses, but I haven't seen anything about applications. So let's add something here, right? That allow it to learn to say, well, when you see application or anything that's synonymous with application, i.e. HR app, well, you should connect that and drive that conversation or that intent, the prediction towards the get password reset link. So I'm just going to add in, the utterance was, I can't log into HR app. And instead of using HR app, I'm going to use application because I might have use cases in the future where I have additional applications that also need to be driven to the same intent. And I don't want to have all of my applications listed within my set of utterances. I just want to have one word, in this case, application, and have all of my custom applications be synonymous with that word application. So this is my way of accomplishing that. So I can't log into application. What I can do again is train and then click on the test button once it's completed. Okay. And now let's do a simple test. I can't log into HR app. Got my apostrophe off. And so now what I have is the correct intent being returned. Now that's kind of cheating because I can't log into application. You see the synonymous behavior between HR app and application, so you know that that's working. But at this point, what I would like to do is further reinforce that I'm getting the right behavior, right? So basically, the additional tuning that I would do is continue to test new utterances that are similar to the one that I just added. I can't log into application. Okay, so I'm not going to do that right now, but you guys should get the point of how to tune your model once you've encountered some gaps in it. What I'd like to do is go back to the presentation and then quickly recap or quickly discuss some of the tuning tips that I just demoed for you, and then open it up to questions that you may have, and we can turn this into an interactive session. So the tuning tips that we just made were, we added vocabulary. So in this case, we added custom applications, acronyms, or synonyms and synonyms. So we did passcode, sorry, and PW, as well as HR app. We made passcode synonymous with password, and same with PW. And then we made HR app synonymous with application. And then what we did was we added an utterance, in this case, the I can't log into application, to the intent, to continue to direct utterances when they come in and they're tested. Another tuning tip that I didn't demo, but I encourage, is to limit yourself to roughly 60 utterances per intent. Now this is important because as you grow the list of utterances and you keep adding to it, what you're not doing is you're not looking, you should be scrutinizing what is in the model. And that means removing the utterances that are not relevant or less important to training your model. Okay, so with that, I'd like to open it up to questions. I think I saw a few of them come through already. Okay, I mean, do people have any questions they'd like to ask live?
So Asif, this is Marcel. So the questions from the chat, from the Q&A window, first question, and I just want to make sure all the attendees are able to see these questions, but someone was asking, do synonyms have to be one single word, or can synonyms be a phrase? For example, password reset instead of just the word password. And the response to that was, a synonym can be used as a replacement word for the system to understand. But if a phrase can be used succinctly to represent the meaning of a word, you can use it. But in this particular case, passcode does not necessarily mean password reset. And then the second question was, should you have a separate NLU model for setup topics, or should you incorporate those into the main NLU model? And the recommendation for that was to have everything incorporated into a single model at this point, to make sure you're testing against all the different intents in that singular model.
Correct. Yeah. So those are all great responses. I think if I was just piling on to that, to the first point of adding phrases as synonyms, as words, and then, vocab words, and then using those to drive synonyms. My advice is to try and keep the virtual agent, or the NLU, which would become effectively the brain for the virtual agent here, as consistent with language as possible. And I say that because you want the virtual agent to learn language, not the way that you kind of speak, right? So, and this is especially critical when you have ITSM, HR, and CSM all in one being driven by a single virtual agent. You want a consistent way that the virtual agent will respond to an end user, whether it's a topic describing for CSM, ITSM, or HR. And so by using phrases, you're kind of teaching it to think like you, as opposed to teaching it to think and understand language. Okay, and then the second one, I'll just pile on and say that, yes, absolutely. This is, the recommendation is to create your own custom application, import all of the intents into that application, and then do all of your tuning in one single place. Any other questions?
Yeah, Asif, there's no other questions from the Q&A or the chat. So now's a great time if you guys have a question or just want some expert guidance. It's a great time to ask.
And so, Marcel, I can't actually access the Q&A chat icon. So if you can read out the question for me, I can try and answer them.
Okay, we have one additional question. Asif, can you explain how entities are tied into model tuning and what our recommendations are around entities as opposed to what you showed with vocabulary and synonyms?
Correct. Yeah. So entities would be used if, so first, the concept of entities is really to understand not just the intent, but within the intent, you are trying to capture pertinent information to the conversation. So for example, would be, can I order a new monitor? Well, that's not just a service request, but it's also a service request specifically to ordering a monitor. And so entities in this case help capture that additional context, in this case, in the example, monitor. Now, where you strike the balance between vocab and entities in New York and Orlando is that for simpler conversations or intents, you want to model around, you can model around entities, in which case you include them into your utterances. But for larger, larger intents, where you have, let's say, 200 plus potential entities. Well, you don't want to start calling out all those entities within your utterances because you'll have a very long list of utterances to maintain. And so the recommended approach is to use vocabulary in those cases. So I know of a customer using vocabulary to say, I've got 200 plus applications. Let me go ahead and add those as vocabulary words, and then tie those all to the synonym of application. And then in my utterances, I'm just going to reference application. And then I've seen another customer use entities for service requests for common items like monitors or keyboards. And those are fairly standard because you'll have a finite set of utterances to describe requesting an item. And so therefore it makes sense. Now, safe harbor statement applies, but in our future roadmap, what we plan to do is tie those vocabulary words to entities and provide a more seamless way of integrating vocab words with entities so that you can have that fine balance between your vocab, your entities, and your utterances. A very good question.
Okay, and Asif, last question is, what's our recommended approach on whether someone can upload entities, utterances, intents? What can you upload? What's recommended? So if you can comment around that, that would be great.
Yeah, we get this a lot. And I think there is a general um, learned behavior of wanting to kind of quickly load data into the system and then kind of, tune a couple wires and then move forward. Well, when it comes to natural language understanding, actually, this is a fairly methodical process. So when it comes to loading up utterances, we actually recommend against doing that. Just go ahead and um, add those utterances directly to the model one at a time. And the reason why you want to do that is because you get to understand and see how those um, incremental changes are changing the behavior of your model. When it comes to things like vocab words, those I can see the desire for loading those into the system faster. And I've heard and seen a customer kind of go an unsupported route, which is to load them directly into the table. But it is something that we are looking at internally. We understand that for some use cases, it makes sense to bulk load data into the system for the purpose of your NLU model. And in those cases, we like to put up guardrails to say, okay, it makes sense in this case, but really we want to drive the correct behavior of being able to kind of uh, systematically and incrementally modify your model, right? So for utterances, take a more systematic and tactical approach. But for other things, on our roadmap is to be able to load words, vocab words, because we generally see the goodness behind that. And I'll also go on record to say that we are internally looking to make incremental changes. And as we learn from customers and our implementation partners of vocab words that are fairly standard across all of our customers, we want to take all of that goodness and bake it into the NLU model as well, so that it gets more intelligent at a starting point over time. So for customers who are implementing a year later from now, they'll have the added benefit of our content and our learnings being inserted into the model. Okay, Marcel, any more questions?
I'm not seeing any. Oh, actually, we just got one in. So, question came through: if a model is published with wrongly trained intents, is there any undo for that? Meaning, can you back out of that? Can you, how is someone supposed to approach that type of situation?
So very interesting question, because there's a concept of publishing your NLU model, and then there's also a concept of publishing your virtual agent topics. Now, if you publish a model and you have some intents in there that are not quite ready to be used, you should be safe in knowing that they might not actually be employed as long as the topics are not published as well. So keep that in mind, that there is sort of this duality between the virtual agent and the NLU model that allows you to connect the components when they're ready. And just because you have more intents published, that doesn't mean that you have to have all of your topics published. That being said, if you do find yourself in a situation where you've published an intent, you can decide to unpublish topic, or worst case scenario, you can disable NLU for the virtual agent.
Okay, and I think lastly, and Asif, you may have covered this earlier in the presentation, but one thing that typically comes up for customers is how do you even get good utterances to support the type of intents that you want to deploy?
Yeah, so really good question. I actually have a slide on this. So this slide is talking about, how to review your utterances, right? Like what is what you want to do, what are you trying to accomplish, and then why are you doing this in the first place? But let me first answer the root of the question that was asked, which is, how do I get these test utterances to begin with? There's a number of places you can get these test utterances from. One is if you're using virtual agent today without NLU, you can start analyzing the chat logs that are being captured behind the scenes to get a sense for how people are asking for things, right? Now, keep in mind that, if you're using virtual agent without NLU, you might run into a couple of conversations that don't sound very natural. They're more caveman-like because perhaps the end user is cluing into keywords as hey, if I type in this, I'm going to get the topic that I'm looking for. So keep that in mind when you're collecting these utterances. And so that's certainly number one. If you don't have virtual agent live and you're starting from scratch and you want to collect some utterances, a good starting point is to look at your short descriptions, but just remember that short descriptions are not conversations. So the way that you describe a problem in a ticket format is not the same as the way you would describe a problem to another human or a virtual agent. They're starting points, but they're not the end all be all. A third way would be to reach out to some friendly users and simply talk to them, understand how they would ask for specific services or goods, etc. And you can use a number of channels to capture that data. So a good way is to just send a survey out, give them a prompt that would clue them in, that sort of masks the concept of an intent. A good example might be if you are running into issues with your computer and you've got a problem. How would you talk to someone over, say, Microsoft Teams or Slack or Skype? How would you express that problem to another person who could help you? And they can just type in freeform text, things like, my computer is slow, can someone help? And you can capture enough data that allows you to get off to a good starting point for testing your model. Okay. And then when you're doing that, review your test utterances. Make sure that you can only infer a single intent. If it's ambiguous to you, it should also be ambiguous to the virtual agent and the NLU model, right? If you start asking yourself questions like, I think it might be this, or maybe they really meant this, then chances are it's not a very good test utterance, and you should treat it as such and just understand that those types of test utterances are better handled by a fallback topic. And it's not worth the effort of trying to model around those types of conversations, because the implications of trying to do that will be that you start to bias the model in certain ways that you never intended.
And I think last question is, people were asking if we're going to be able to share a copy of what was presented today as everyone goes through their model tuning exercises, if they're going to be able to get a copy to reference back to.
I believe the answer to that would be yes. And I'm going to reverse just a little bit, because the concepts that I'm talking about today will also be available on Now Learning. I'm going through the effort of working with my internal training team to make sure that these tuning techniques are broadcast out in the form of proper training. I've written a number of articles on NLU modeling, tuning techniques, tips, and tricks that are available on the community site. And forums like this will also be a way for capturing more information. But again, the answer to your short question was yes. But I also wanted to pile on the fact that we are investing heavily in bolstering the concepts of model tuning in different places. Okay. You said last question. Was there anything else, Marcel, or is that it?
No further questions that I'm seeing.
Okay. Well, with that, I just want to say thank you so much. I think that, hopefully that this has given you a primer for how to go out and tune. again, be on the lookout. We should have some new training available in the next couple of weeks that will further expand and elaborate on a lot of these concepts. I do have a number of community articles on community that talk about navigating the NLU model builder, tips on how to extend the out-of-the-box intents, as well as a quick overview of tuning, which I covered with you guys here as well. So with that, I just want to wish you happy tuning, and thank you so much for listening.